This is episode 30 with Mark McGroarty. Welcome to the Doc Fitness podcast, where it's all about developing your mindset, training and nutritional knowledge so you can lose body fat and build muscle effectively while still living a real life. I am your host, David O'Connor. Now let's get into the show. So Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a million for having me on, David. Lovely to get to chat to you.
Excellent. It's great to have you on board, Mark, and I'm going to dive straight in. I don't know if you know about this, but I always ask everyone the first question in 10 seconds or less, Mark. What would you say it is that you do? So you have to describe it in 10 seconds or less.
Okay, timer on. Okay, go. I am a movement scientist and I work in a movement clinic that I founded with my business partner Hugh, and what we do is we help people to move better. Time up?
8 seconds, yeah, perfect.
Nice.
So moving better, fantastic. And how did this kind of come to life, Mark? Just give us a little bit more context behind, I suppose how it started, like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I used to play rugby for years. I played when I was in secondary school, and then I played when I got to university. And my second last season, I got a pretty bad back injury. So I had a herniated disc that was pushing on my sciatic nerve. And that was giving me lots of grief down my leg. So when I'd sit down for long periods, and I mean like 30 minutes to an hour, let's say, my feet would go numb. And when I was trying to run, I'd have this really sharp, tingling pain running down my leg. And obviously, I went straight to the physio once that happened to get it checked out. And what it was I was doing jump squats in the gym and probably was doing them with poor technique and with weight, which was a little bit too heavy for me to handle. And I just sort of herniated the disc, as in the disc had just started protruding out of the vertebrae and just touching on the sciatic nerve. So that took me down a long road of heading to see physiotherapists, heading to see chiropractors, heading to see surgeons, and all through that process, nobody actually looked at, firstly, how the injury had happened. So no one actually looked at me doing a squat, and then no one had looked at me move at all. They were all just focusing on the spine itself and the disc and those vertebrae and like the degrees of, how close they were to each other and how much percentage of the disc was protruding. And the treatment I got was strengthen my back up, and I got an injection into my back to sort of an anti-inflammatory injection, which is supposed to, ease the area and hopefully let the disc sort of slip back in. But after that, so I went back playing rugby and I was all fine and everything, but my feet would still go numb when I was sitting down, and I was on my J1 after my final year in college, and I remember just being at the computer and I was like applying for jobs at the time, and my feet went numb, and I just said, this is ridiculous. So I got sent down a rabbit hole of trying to figure out exactly why that was the case. And, a couple of years later, I stumbled across that it was probably the initial movement that caused the injury, and then I started trying to figure out what did I do in that movement that caused that injury, and then realized that maybe I actually was really, really poor at moving, and then here we are today. Okay,
and when you were on the J1, what were you already kind of in, let's say, physio related in college, were you?
Yeah, so my undergrad is in health and performance science in UCD, and then I did a master's, a research master's in injury prevention, looking at biomechanics and hamstring injuries. So yeah, my background was in sport and exercise science, but at no stage during those degrees did I really, really click with me as to how important that quality of movement is. And how it's sort of, you can just overlook it a little bit with training programs and things like that.
Yeah, no, I can relate 100%. I remember I don't know if I'm definitely going to pronounce this wrong, but you probably know it. Is it Olgo Schlaters?
Osgood Schlatters. That's the one.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with that, 7 years ago, 8 years ago now at this stage, and more, what am I saying? And I was just basically told, you can't do anything for a year, and you're basically telling a lad who's active 24/7 that he can't do I can't go hurling, I can't do X, Y, and Z. There was talks of injections as well, and I kind of knew from back then, like, I knew that injection was kind of like only painting over the rust, so to speak. Yeah. And I was kind of led down my own little rabbit hole in that, and I kind of stumbled across certain people. And have you ever heard of Strong First? Kettlebell?
I have heard of Strong First, yeah.
The reason why I started to like those guys is that I love their kind of pickiness with movement and movement quality. Now, I do think that they go overboard in a lot of things, but the movement stuff was what attracted me to that. And when I started training with kettlebells, I realised that my knees weren't, especially my left knee, the one that I had the Osgo Slaters in it, or I was able to train without pain, and I felt like I was actually able to do a lot of stuff that I wasn't supposed to be doing. And like, I did all this eccentric training and loads of different bits and bobs with, like, I had probably 5 or 6 different physios, and I got to a certain level, but I always got to a level where I still wasn't, I didn't.
You weren't
really,
fully recovered.
Yeah, I didn't feel strong. I felt weak as a chicken, like. And then I started training for the actual Strong First certification. I joined up to it, I did it, and that kind of led into Doc Fitness kind of being born from there then as well. So like, from those early days, movement has been a big passion of ours. We even have it in our slogan, like Doc Fitness, underneath our slogan is health, movement and strength. And it's something that we do it so automatically now these days. The clients nearly expect it. Do you know what I mean? They come in, we have our warm-ups, which are all fucking strategically planned out for each session, etc. But we have mobility stuff peppered into our workouts as well. Now, I use the term mobility loosely. It could be any style of, we'll say, stretch/activation work, just for people to understand kind of what I'm on about. But we pepper that into the workouts because basically we give a shit about it as such. And that's kind of where I want to lead with the first question, Mark. We kind of, for you, movement was important to kind of come away from the position you were in to move pain-free as such. But why should somebody listen to this podcast care about movement if there's something wrong with them right now? Do you know what I mean? They don't have any issues. Why is movement so important?
Yeah, well, the old saying, like, you only have one body, so you've got to really take care of it. Your joints, in everyday motion, so when you're walking, let's take for an example, there's a huge amount of movement that happens at all the joints in the body. A lot of the movement that happens is rotational work. So your ankles rotate, your knees rotate, your hips rotate, your shoulders rotate, your T-spine rotate, your rib cage rotates. For you to stay walking up to like 80, 90, please God, 100 years of age, you need to have rotation in all those joints, and you need to have good movement across all those joints. And what mobility training or movement training does is it just sort of isolates that aspect of movement that maybe you are lacking. Let's take the example of rotation, that you might be lacking a little bit of rotation. Maybe it's throughout your training program there isn't much rotation. I can guarantee you that if you aren't training that rotation, at some stage you will lose it. And the use it or lose it model that the body works in covers, absolutely everything from, the French in the Leaving Cert that you did a couple of years ago. If you don't keep up the French, you're going to lose the French. Same as with the quality of and the quantity of your movement. So if you don't keep up with rotational work in terms of your movement, you'll eventually lose it. And right now, you're not in pain and that doesn't affect you. If you take a sort of longer term look at it and you want to grow to the age of 80, 85, 90 and be able to play golf or go for hikes or even just play with your grandkids, it's really, really, really important that you start training your movement and mobility now so that when you're that age you can do whatever the hell it is you want to do. Brilliant. Even
the fact that you said that, I know like the 20-something-year-old mightn't give a shit about playing golf in their 90s because they can't think past next week. But like, I always use the example for some people, we'll get people saying, I'd love to join Doc Fitness, but I'm way too old for it. And these are people like that are in their 50s, 60s, and beyond even. But I always use the example of one of our long-term members, John. I'm not going to say his age on this podcast, but he's our eldest client. And when he first started, like, Mark, he literally wanted to not have pain reaching back from the driving seat if he was parked up in a car park and he wanted to get his jacket in the back seat. He wanted to be able to literally put his hand back in the back seat, grab his jacket, and off he goes in the car. But he couldn't even barely turn his neck to mind his arm. And within, I think it was whatever, how many months we were starting with first, after the first 4 or 5 months, he'd gotten super strong just from our training alone. But we did a lot of specific mobility stuff and activation work and release work around all T-spine, lats, kind of shoulder stuff, mobility, etc. And after that first 4 month period, I remember the joy in his face telling me that he's absolutely zero pain anymore doing the basic tasks that he wants to do, and he's still with us today. Like that was 4 years ago. Like, just to hear that alone was like, wow, you know, that's all that man wants, is just to move pain free and enjoy life. Like, whereas I would have never seen that, like, you know, because I'm not in that position yet, you know. So it's, I suppose
it's amazing. I think sometimes that that people see, you wouldn't know until you get a bad injury maybe, or until you receive lots of pain, how poor maybe or how little you've cared about your movement quality. But once something like that happens, like that fella John, like that's incredible that he's now able to rotate enough, his shoulder enough and his T-spine enough to take his jacket out of the car. Like that could have been so debilitating for him. And if you can only embed that attitude now and save yourself years of aches and pains and years of debilitating things happening to you, it'll stand to you so much the older you get. And it really matters when you do get older. And so what you're doing now with this sort of style of training is you're bulletproofing your body and your joints to be able to handle whatever the hell it is you want to do when you get older.
Yes, that's probably good terminology to describe it. Even from a sport perspective, GAA, for example, like the amount of injuries that are in GAA, like you can nearly guarantee someone, if they're doing basic strength performance training and they're, let's say, doing some movement style stuff for their joints, they're going to decrease the likelihood of injury over time. I know it for myself because I'm one of those people. I used to be getting little niggles and pains and full-on injuries in the early days. I heard them when I started strength training in general and giving a shit about my, let's say, mobility / movement. Things just kind of drastically came down and injuries were very few and far in between, you know. And I suppose, again, for someone that's in sport or, like you said, they haven't experienced an injury yet, it's only when they do experience that they're like, okay, then they start to care about this stuff. Because like we've a lot of clients that have I've had a guy before who had 2 fused ankles. We've had a guy that has certain plates in his hips, which limits him in certain areas. We have numerous people with discs gone, out, bulging, etc. But I nearly phrase it in a different way in their head sometimes. I'm like, because you have this or because X, Y, or Z, but they're fine. They can still train, but they just need to be careful. I tell them, we show them, like, the fact that you've had this issue before, it's going to cause you to actually care for your movement when you're training a lot more versus the person who is fine, if that makes sense. Because from that, Mark, like, what would be the biggest mistakes you see with people when it comes to training itself?
Training itself, like, there's
as in resistance training, I would say. Someone that's going
Yeah. The biggest thing the biggest trend that we see is 2 things. So we see lots of sort of like back stiffness or back pain, and then we see lots of joints that can't rotate. And to me, what they boil down to is when is that person moving their spine? That's a question that we always ask with anyone with back pain. Like, when do you consciously take your spine through its full range of motion in an unloaded manner? And then the second thing is we ask, how often do you train your rotation? So for a healthy joint, it needs to rotate and it needs to go through a full range of motion on a daily basis. So within your joints, they're surrounded by synovial fluid. The only way to replenish that synovial fluid is through movement. So if you take that one step further, the only way for you to have a really full, healthy joint is to take it through its full range of motion on a daily basis. And then within training programs, then the sort of areas that I see lacking are, one, work for the spine. I would always recommend that you always have something in there that's working on the movement and mobility in your spine. And two, parceling in a little bit of rotational work. Lots of strength exercises and resistance exercises are in the sagittal plane, so they're going up and down. So sort of like you can think of them as squats or bench. They're going in one plane of motion. The world we live in is in 3 planes of motion, so we live in 3D world. So you just need to almost just put in a little bit of rotational training, and that can be as simple as a shoulder circle. It can be simple as an ankle circle, and it can be as simple as like a hip circle. And those little circles, while they might seem insignificant, they actually just make your joints really, really healthy, so that when you want to do whatever it is, when you want to go for your max bench, that you've been working in the sagittal plane for a long time, you've also been working in the rotational plane. So if it needs a little bit of rotation to get you up to the top of that, you actually have it in your arsenal to be able to do that.
Fantastic. So basically, lack of rotation, lack of movement in those areas is what you see the most that lead to maybe issues down the line.
Yeah, pretty much. Like for the vast majority of people, especially people that aren't injured at the minute or aren't in pain at the minute, we always see that they're just lacking some rotational capacity in their joints, whether it's their ankles, their knees, their hips, their shoulder, their spine, their neck. And it's just, it's lifestyle based as well. If most of your training program is up, down, and, everything in the world in front of you is straight forward, straight backwards, you are going to get very little rotation in. But just the thought of consciously adding that into your programs will just give you massive benefits. It'll make the joint healthier. It'll also probably increase your potential to lift heavier weights, because even in a sagittal plane movement, there is some rotation that happens, and you want to maximize that as much as possible.
Well, it's going to allow you to train longer as well, isn't it? Like, if, let's just say, once a year, or maybe hopefully not once a year, but somebody gets injured for X amount of weeks, that's X amount of weeks that you cannot maybe progress as much as you'd like in terms of whatever your goal might be, So if some young guy is looking to pack on muscle tissue, if he's after doing something to his back or his hip, you're going to limit how much muscle you can build in that year. So even looking at it from that perspective, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe I'll start caring about this stuff a bit more. But even the fact there, you were saying to put it into your program, it's probably the easiest thing to do is just to turn it into like a planned exercise within your gym work, within your training program, which makes you do it. It's something that in here for our guys, when we train them, like us coaches used to make sure that for our main movements, this is after now a full blown 5 to 10 minute proper warm up as well, we'll just call it a mobility exercise peppered into the main lift of the workout. So you might have like squats, we might have a hip rotational exercise, and then we might have a secondary like other body part exercise, if depends on the program for that month. But that mobility exercise would always be there. And then when I was training my online guys, I used to kind of say it, I used to loosely say it, do some mobility with your main lift, but I didn't have it actually physically written in the program. So you'd have A1 squat, you'd have B1 or whatever, A1 squat or A squat on its own. You wouldn't have the actual mobility exercise written in. And for our own personal training as well, my own training, I just used to forget to do it because I didn't have somebody there telling me to do it. Do you know what I mean? So from that little tweak to writing in, and I put an extra column in my program to write mobility, that's literally it. I started properly adhering to doing that in my own training, and my online clients started applying with them as well. And again, even if they don't think, they mightn't think that there's much going on there's actually so much they're doing for their just health and longevity overall.
Yeah, hugely. I think you've nailed it there with just peppering it into the program. And this stuff, it doesn't even take you extra time. If you're taking a heavy set of bench, you're going to take a minute to 2 minutes off before you go into your next one. Even if you're doing a superset, after you finish the second exercise, you might take, 30 seconds to a minute and a half of just getting a breather. That's where you just throw in, the rotational work. So your program length doesn't even change. You're just way more efficient. So instead of that minute and a half where you're just checking your phone, you could be checking your phone with one hand and doing a beautiful shoulder rotation with the other hand, and then swapping sides again. And it's just maximizing your time in the gym in terms of efficiency. And then also you're just maximizing the health of your joints as well, which can only be a good thing.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. I had something there that I was gonna, I suppose maximising the time. Like, when you look, like, you're still going to be the same length of time in the gym. Look at it from another perspective. You're moving more as well. You're getting you're getting yourself used to, I suppose. I suppose what I'm trying to say is there's knock-on effects for doing that stuff as well. You're not going to be fecking lazy basically in between sets. You're going to be conscious of doing some mobility stuff. You're constantly moving when you're in the gym. You're getting your work done. You're getting it efficiently done. It's like sitting on a train, like sitting on your phone on Facebook on a train journey into somewhere that's an hour long versus you could bang out 6 or 7 work emails that's done there for that time. You're using your fucking time efficiently. But we find that, like, even for my own training, I find when I used to not have mobility stuff in it, I'd get lazy in between sets. I'd take extra rest. Whereas when I know my mobility exercise to do or whatever it is, I'm out of my exercise, I'm walking over, I'm doing my mobility exercise, and even if I'm chatting to someone that's in the gym as well at the same time, I'm back into my set again. It kind of keeps me on track a little bit more. I don't even know, Mark, if that makes sense, but it's just something that I wanted to throw in. But I suppose from there then, Mark, yeah, we probably already mentioned it, putting mobility stuff or movement stuff into the workout, but kind of give us an example, I suppose, what we mean by that in terms of what specific drills somebody could do. So let's just say if somebody had maybe some hip issues, upper back issues, shoulder issues, what are kind of certain, I know it's hard to explain on a podcast, but what are certain styles of mobility drills can you put in? How long would you do them? Do you do them 20 seconds, 30 seconds? Do you 10 reps or 5 reps roughly? Like, what kind of guidelines do you usually give?
Yeah, so what we do is we think, and this is a philosophy we have in our movement clinic, is that if all your mobility work should ideally be active. And what that means is that you are using your own muscles to take your joint through a movement. The really simplest ones, and the ones you'll see on Instagram and stuff, are called CARs. So C-A-R and then a small s. And that stands for a controlled articular rotation, which is a really fancy way of saying a slow joint circle. So it is really as simple as if you're taking your hip, being on all fours and then bringing one hip back up behind you, sort of like that fire hydrant drill, rotating it out to the side, keeping it up towards your elbow and then slowly bringing it in towards your knee and then reversing. And all you're doing is taking your hip through a circle. But what that gives you is just a massive amount it gives you feedback right to the joint about how much control and how much range you have in that movement. And while you're doing that, what we go for is we'll either go for a number of reps. So it'll either be 5 each way, each side, or we'll go for a set period of time. So 1 minute each side. And if you think about putting it into your gym program, 2 minutes during a rest period, that's generally like a decent amount of time to have a rest period. If you can then put in that hip rotational car in during that rest period, you've done 2 minutes, you've taken your hip through a full range of motion, and then that's it, bang, done. You're finished with that. The important thing with movement and mobility training is the consistency. So rather than being a hero and going to the gym on your down day and doing, an hour once a week, it's much better to do 1 to 2 minutes per day during your sessions over a prolonged period of time, because the consistent feedback for the central nervous system is what allows it to adapt to the change or the intervention that you're putting on that joint. But you can do the hip car or the hip circle to any joint. So you can do an ankle circle, you can do a wrist circle, a shoulder circle. It's endless what you can do. And then the one last thing to remember when you are doing this stuff is you want it to be really slow and really controlled. So the danger, it's not really a danger. What ends up happening is people go to do their hip circles and they just fly through them. What you're actually trying to do is you're trying to get as much control over the joint throughout that full range. So really slowly and really controlled is the way you want to look at it. And then the sets and reps are 5 each way each side or a minute each side, depending on your preference.
And when you say that minute mark, are you saying like that's a minute built up to each side is kind of all what you need to do?
Yeah.
As a rough guideline, like.
Yeah, 100%. Once you're consistent with that, absolutely. If you were to do a minute each side of your hip for 5 days a week for the next 10 years, your hips would just be in incredible shape. Rather than doing, 10 minutes of hip work once a week. It's just not enough information getting into the central nervous system to really cause any change or any adaptation at the joint level.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that hip one as well, because that's one that I've been doing this year a lot of too, but I always find myself kind of just forgetting to do it then on another day because I'm so used to doing other kind of warm-up movements and stuff like that. But I suppose the hip ones and the shoulder ones are ones that we use the most here for definite, just because the amount of shoulder issues we see are just, nobody puts their arms overhead anymore unless they're training. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, big time. We see that a lot as well.
Yeah.
What we actually created is like a 10-minute mobility flow. So it actually takes 9 minutes and 50 seconds, and you take all your joints through their full range of motion 3 times each way, each side, really slow and really controlled. And that video, you can find it through our Instagram or our YouTube channel. If you just search human-centered MOV, it comes up, and that's it. If you're to plug that into your session, so it takes 10 minutes in total, but you can split that into, 9 1 minutes, depending on how many exercises you have. Then you've ticked the box, you've hit all of them, you've done your rotational work, and then you're happy to go home, and your joints are happy as well.
Brilliant. I'll put that in the show notes page anyway for this episode. Okay, fantastic. And the cars then, like that originated from, what's the guy's name?
Dr. Andrea Spinea, yeah.
Spinea,
the F4C is the name of the company, Functional Range Conditioning.
And my understanding of even the word mobility, because I think it does get bastardized an awful lot. It gets, when people hear the word mobility, I used to think it meant jumping on a foam roller and foam rolling. Now it's kind of more so, I view it as probably the ability to control a joint through its full range of motion. Am I kind of nearly there with that? Yeah.
Well, like mobility is, what does it actually mean? No, nobody really knows.
Yeah.
But what we term as mobility is this movement-based controlled work. So controlling a joint or a movement through its full range. That's what we consider mobility work. The other stuff, the foam rolling, we would call, soft tissue work, which is good stuff as well. But the long-term benefit's always going to come from movement rather than anything passive.
And then when you work on this movement, so you might work, let's just say that you work on your hip rotations that we just talked about there for a minute either side, you pepper that into your warm-up, and you do some other movements with cat camels, Spider-Man lunges and a few bits and bobs, and you're warmed up, and you do your warm sets for your squats. You might be, what am I right in saying, Mark, that might help to give you a fraction of maybe extra range you didn't have before that session, and now you're training in that range as well. And if you're controlling that during your actual movement and not fucking bastardizing your squats, as in like doing the movement itself properly or under control, etc., when you're training in that range of motion too in the session, it's gonna, I suppose, work better at keeping that newfound range over time. Would I be right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You're cementing that new range, pretty much, and that's the way we program it with our members, is exactly that. So we'll take them through a car, and then that'll open up some new range, and then we will utilize that new range straight away. So basically you're telling the central nervous system, okay, I have this amount of range, it's increased a little bit here, and then now I'm doing an exercise that's forcing me to use this new range, and then it just cements it in like a computer program, just runs then every time after that. And all that happens, the more you do it, like the more range you get, the more control you get, the bigger your range of motion becomes, and the more control you'll have over any movement. So that if you get into a compromising situation at the bottom of a squat where the bar was a little bit too heavy and your right knee turns in, your hip's done that 100,000 times before, so it doesn't cause catastrophic injury to your hip. Your knee just rotates back out because, again, you've done that 100,000 times, and you can get back up from the squat, no harm. Well, when we see people get into pain and injury is when they get into a compromising position that they haven't trained, if you know what I mean. So when they get down into that position, and maybe the bar, they've loaded one side heavier than the other, you know, and that sort of twists their hips a little bit, or twists one knee in towards the other one. That can cause sharp pain if the knee has never been in that position, or the hip has never had to rotate in that position. But if you're consistently hitting the full range in your sessions, it can only be a good thing. And no one's ever going to regret doing a mobility exercise, you know?
Yeah, of course. And Mark, would you be training, you're talking about joints. Are you training all the ligaments and tendons around that joint too by doing these CARs and doing these, we'll say, movement-based exercises, we'll say?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about it, if you're trying to move your hip, the first place that movement happens is right in at the joint. And then after that, the movement takes place sort of like, that's the epicenter. It moves out from that. So if there's any joint, ligament or tendon or muscle attached in and around that joint, once you move that joint, that has to move as well. It's actually an easier way. A joint way of movement is actually an easier way than isolating muscles. Because you only have to move one muscle and one joint, and there might be 13 muscles attached, and they're all getting a little bit of movement then as well.
Fantastic, yeah. Like, even you saying that, I'm thinking back, the last 2 years I've had 2 tears in each of my shoulders. So I've had to drastically modify training. Like, a push-up was excruciating for me. I couldn't do a push-up. So I remember after the initial kind of recovery period, I was able to do super high elevated push-ups. And I was actually able to do very light chest press machines as well to keep some stimulation in the chest muscles, we'll say, and that kind of movement in general. And I simply progressed that over time while doing CARs based stuff for the shoulder. The simple, the other one where you're bringing the arms straight up to the ear, going back. I did that every day. I did a ton of rotator cuff work, band pull apart work, shoulder dislocations kind of style stuff when it wasn't too painful. But I'm thinking back to the injury itself, and the first one happened in a hurling match, and I remember I was running to pick down a ball, and the full back caught my left arm and pulled it completely back as I still tried to go for the ball. So I was like, I'm doing it here as I'm talking to you, so my voice is probably tapering off, but I was, fully extended with both arms, and my left arm was literally dragged out of its socket nearly. Didn't even feel it at the time because it happened within a split second, and it was like the last 5 minutes of a game, and it was a close game, so the adrenaline was up. And I remember just walking out of the dressing room after that game, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I can't even move my shoulder. And I couldn't do feck all with it, and that night I was in a sling. Had to get an injection into play the final 2 weeks later, and an injection 2 weeks later after that to play the Connacht final. But I'm looking back now thinking that happened to me probably, or I might have avoided, you're never going to completely avoid injury, but I might have avoided that if I kept better care of my shoulders and did this kind of stuff more.
Yeah. So with this stuff, like, it just takes it through its full range. So I'm guessing one hand, you had the hurl in one hand, so your your palm was facing up in one hand, and then he had your hand behind you, so your wrist was facing up the other way. So they're the two extremes of, one is internal rotation and the other is external rotation. Rarely do we see people in their gym program having to get into external rotation or maximal internal rotation. And they're both movements that happen in life. So you're right, you can never fully avoid injuries. Like, he could have yanked that, no matter how much rotational work you did, he could have yanked it hard enough to, do a bit of damage. But he definitely, if you were training that internal or external rotation at its end range consistently, it would have been a little bit quicker for the recovery, at least, if not potentially avoidable. You would have been a little bit more comfortable in that position almost. Yeah, definitely. And it happened to me about 12 months later again on my right shoulder. More of the same stuff, but I was able to I found the recovery process was a lot quicker the second time because I was doing shoulder stuff in general since the first injury, if that makes sense. But yeah, Mark, I think we've driven home, I suppose, the importance of it all and integrating it into warm-ups and into your training programs in general. But I feel we're just talking about CARs a little bit in terms of getting the joint to its full rotation, which is fantastic and all. But is there any other stuff that we're missing out on, I suppose, general day-to-day life stuff? I'm just thinking of
people in office kind of work situations when they're sitting all day long. They hop on a car to drive. Maybe if they do, they go to the gym, they drive to the gym, they hop back in the car again to drive home from the gym. They're sitting down in the evening watching telly. Like, obviously these factors are going to have an impact on their moving quality as well. But like, is there any areas we're missing out on there that you might be able to give the listeners some takeaways on?
If you're doing a gym session every day and you're now hitting your rotation in all those gym sessions, and you're taking, each of your joints into those rotations, you're not really missing anything. But if that's not something you do, then I would recommend that you just start doing it immediately, because the movement you need, it's like you have to have rotation. The other side of the coin in terms of mobility is like improving the range of motion you have, and that stuff is all done through end range strengthening. So you take a joint to its end range and then you force the muscles either side of that joint to contract. And it's basically just really simple. It's just strengthening your joint at its end range, which generally for most people is where actually injuries happen. And the training is, the easiest one to think of is a straight leg raise. So if you're lying on your back with one leg out in front of you and then you lift your right leg up to sort of get it to a 90-degree angle, what you would do then is block that position. So you put that leg at the 90-degree angle using a wall or using a rig in a gym, and then you contract the muscles each side. So what that will look like is you driving your heel into the wall or into the rig to activate the muscles on one side, and then it'll be you trying to pull that leg further up towards your head, which activate the muscles on the other side. And training in sort of those end ranges, training strength in those end ranges, improves your range of motion throughout a joint or throughout a group of muscle tissues.
Okay, fantastic.
So if you're someone that does, the old hurler hamstring stretch, which a lot of people do, you could just be a little bit more efficient and, do some end range strengthening rather than just a passive stretch.
Yeah, I know it's, even when you're doing this stuff with clients, we do the other 90-90 one. We do that. I just love that. I love that drill. It's unreal, I think, to be honest. But it's all well and good us talking about it in the podcast, but I do think people just need to get, a lot of the time, physical help with being shown these and doing these right, because there is, me and you find it easy, but people don't.
So on our Instagram page, we have, like, if someone was to go to it now, we've got hundreds of exercises for every part of the body, for, whether it's a car, like a rotational work, or whether it's end range strengthening. There is almost a library there. So if there's anyone that's interested in probably learning a little bit more about how they can apply it to themselves, if they just head to our Instagram page, they can just basically select whatever exercise they want, and there should be a good explanation, either myself or Hugh talking you through the exercise. And all you have to do is just start somewhere rather than not starting at all.
Yes, of course. And then these, I'll put all these links up on the show notes page, guys, listening anyway. And Mark, like, if somebody got an injury then, and like, there's something that one of my pet hates is, I'd say we've about 10 clients at the moment now that have been diagnosed with injuries, or they have injuries, and we're simply working around them. And we liaise then with the physios. We don't try and pretend we're physios here, not at all, but we liaise with the physio to see that the work that they've been given, so they can tick the boxes with that, and we can get on with our kind of training as such to work around as best we can until the injury heals. Or if there's anything that we can do, we'll do that with them as well, of course. But for people with injuries and knee pain and back pain and stuff that they haven't really got anywhere with it, am I right in saying that they might get onto you straight away when an injury comes? Is that what you do essentially? Yeah, we do. We cover all the spectrums of injury and pain and movement and performance. So, but yes, a lot of people we see are people who come in with back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, and they want to get out of that pain. And the style of training that we do with the mobility work on our other bits and pieces makes our success rate really, really high for that sort of stuff.
But the first thing with any injury, that just for anyone wondering what they should do now whose knee is sore, is move the knee as much as you can through a pain-free range of movement. And over time, like the minute or 2 minutes per day, over enough time with enough stimulation for the central nervous system, your body has no option other than to respond in a positive way to that. And that's essentially what rehabbing any injury is. You're taking the joint in question through a pain-free range of movement and slowly building up that range until you're at sort of back to your full range or back to your end range of wherever the joint was injured.
Brilliant. And you do kind of short-term programs for this kind of stuff as well, don't you? Like more specific, let's say, movement-based programs. Yeah,
we do online training as well for purely for mobility training. But yeah, we do. If someone was to come into us one-on-one who wanted to either improve their mobility or get out of pain, we would take them through a program of whatever length. Generally, we try to work in 12-week blocks, but for our online stuff, it's only 6 weeks. And then for one-to-ones, there's no limit or minimal amount of time.
Mark, is there anything we're leaving out there, do you think? Or can we, I suppose, sum up in an easy to understand format for the key takeaways from all this? A lot of stuff we went through, but I think we can definitely sum it up into an easy to digest format if we haven't already done that. I think we already have done it, but yeah.
So the first one would be just have a think about your training programs. Do they incorporate rotation? And what I mean by that is global rotation, so the rotating of your whole body, but also individual rotation of your joints. And that should be a yes/no exercise. If it's yes, great. Congratulations, you've got a good trainer, and you're on the right path. If that's no, then maybe that's something you need to consider, because in real life there is a huge amount of rotation that happens. And the example of John trying to get his jacket out of the car is a perfect example of that. He needed to turn his head, he needed to turn his shoulders, and he needed to turn his upper back to get that out. And then the second thing is, are you training at your end ranges to increase your flexibility or your range of motion? And again, if you're already doing a stretching program, so if you're stretching before the gym and you're doing 10 minutes of it, I think there's probably a way to be a little bit more efficient there that will have a little bit more, you get better gains out of it as well. So rather than passive stretching, try to do something active where you're taking the joint to its end range and then contracting it as much as you can.
I suppose, Mark, the one thing that I kind of touched on briefly, but I didn't circle back around to it, is the whole, like, how people train in general in terms of like how people do their bench press, how they squats, their deadlifts, X, Y, and Z. I think that does play a massive role in it as well, because it's all well and good doing this kind of stuff, but if you're going to go off and be an egotistical dickhead in the gym, and you might think you're training grand, but if someone was to look at you and you'd be like, do you know what I mean? Like, isn't it very hard for someone to know? Like, how can somebody know that's genuinely blinded by their own ego that their training quality is probably shit, and that eventually they're going to run into walls for themselves? Like, how do you even... I suppose they're only going to realise it when they do get injured, aren't they?
I hope that's a rhetorical question, because I certainly don't have the answer to that one.
Yeah, I didn't realise what I was asking. I was like, oh, geez.
No, it's a really fair point, and probably would have avoided my injury if my squat technique was good. But there's little things you can do if you struggle with body weight form of the exercise, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it loaded. So for instance, if you're a powerlifter, or you're someone that squats a lot and squats are your thing, and you can't do one in your bare feet without falling over or feeling unstable or a little bit of pain, then maybe it's not a good idea that you're loading it up too much. So a quick test for anyone is just try the movement unloaded and see where you are with that. If it feels unstable, if you don't feel like you can perform it, or there's even a little bit of pain there, then maybe that's something that you need to then have a look at the quality of what you're doing on a loaded basis.
Yeah, like even I was chatting with one of our guys there today. He had to go away from us for a couple of weeks at work, and he is coming back into us now again, and he's been training in a public gym since he left us, and one thing that he was saying to me, he just kind of threw it in at the end of the phone call today. He was like, Jesus, Dave, sometimes I can't bear to look at what some people are doing to themselves in the gym, and I just started laughing at the phone. I was like, look, that's the joys of it, because and the other side of it too is you can't say that to those people, because they're probably just going to say, like, who the hell is this guy? Like, who? What does he know? Do you know, if you see somebody doing a dog crap deadlift or terrible form squats, etc., people don't really know any better, because people think that as well by just jumping on YouTube and following a random program that they're going to be fine. And this is why I suppose we need to get on to people like you, Mark, and ourselves. Are going to put a Doc Fitness plug in there to do shit right, like, you know, and get, you know, if you're years in pain, if you're years not getting where you know you probably could be getting in the gym, ask for fucking help. It's probably the easiest answer for a lot of people at the end of the day. But look at it, I know it's easier for us to say that, but it's something that I always circle back around to with people. Look at, just ask for help.
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore. You know, the relative cost of, you know, the services that we supply is pretty cheap in the grand scheme of things when you take into account how much people will spend on a night out or whatever. But also,
how much are pints in Dublin these days?
Don't ask. I think also it's important just to remember that if you're new to the gym, or you're someone who's never had any experience of the gym, it's not a bad thing to go and get someone to check you out and either like to see how you're moving, one, but also to give you a little bit of guidance, because it's only going to help your success. And if you're paying whatever you're paying for your gym membership, you want to be able to use that, and you don't want to be injured and not using it. So investing, you know, whatever it is for a personal one-to-one with someone is always going to benefit you in the long run, to either, one, keep you moving well, and two, getting you to hit your goals, which is really what you joined the gym for in the first place.
Brilliant. And Mark, you said Instagram is where all the videos are. Is there anywhere else you'd like me to send people as well? I think you're, even from my own perspective, your Instagram is top class. That's probably the best place to send people, is it?
Yeah, that's well, our YouTube channel. It's kind of not really a runner at the minute, but yeah, the Instagram, just go there. There's thousands of exercises there, and the other thing is, if there isn't an exercise and there's one you want, just send us a DM, because we're always looking to increase we have to make videos anyway, so we might as well make ones that people can't find an exercise for, or maybe an exercise that we have missed.
Yes, and probably, if you're already training at the moment, guys, and you don't pepper in this kind of stuff into your workouts, head over to Mark's page. From my own perspective, I would say pick like a hip one, pick like a shoulder one, T-spine one, and just get them done in the coming week and see what you think. But any injuries, niggles that are going on long term, again, if you need help, you need help, reach out and ask for it, because it's only going to benefit you in the long run. And Mark, if you have anything else now you'd like to plug in here, website details, and yeah, now's the time.
Yeah, so you can find us at humancenteredmovement.ie. Our username for like Instagram, Facebook and YouTube, etc. is humancenteredmov. So you can just find us there. Our movement clinic is based in Churchtown, and myself and Hugh see people for the initial assessment, and that's really what our value add is. We can get to the root cause of movement deficiencies and maybe what's causing you pain, or movement limitations that are happening. So if you're someone that wants to take a really in-depth look at your biomechanics, how you're moving, and see where your limitations are, don't be afraid to contact us either through our website or our social media platforms.
Yeah, brilliant. And I suppose as well, like, people need to be aware, guys, I wouldn't have got Mark on the podcast if I knew Mark wasn't worth his salt. In general, I mean it in the best way possible. I'm not trying to be, that's not trying to come off in a bad way. But guys, Mark knows his shit. Mark has a team there as well. Like, is it you a physio, isn't he, Mark?
Hugh's a physio, yeah, and then I'm a movement scientist.
And then the third guy's name again?
Chris is S&C. He's currently working with the Kilkenny Hurlers. So,
yeah, and
there's lots of experience there.
Experience, common sense, and you train yourselves. There's so many people that, like doctors and physios, giving recommendations, and they don't train themselves. They don't they're not in the trenches doing this stuff. And a lot of information that we hear back from our clients is just kind of like, it's not bad information, it's just that it's nearly like it's a little bit old for being 2019. And there's different ways to kind of get to the root cause of what's going on. Like Mark gave his story at the start and how you can progress around that. And all I'm saying is, I suppose, give Mark a follow over on Instagram, and that basically sums it up.
Yeah, nice one, David. It was a lovely little plug at the end. I appreciate that. Love what you guys are doing as well. Keep it up. I saw you through that the lunge exercise where you're talking about movement quality, and that's what I was jumping and raving about. It was excellent. So keep doing what you're doing. Keep peppering in that mobility work, and you'll have happy clients for sure.
That's it. Mark, thank you very much for coming on, and we might even get you back in the future to talk more stuff if we can come up with different topic or different areas for the future.
Sounds good, David. Be my pleasure.
Chat to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So guys, that was Mark from Movement Centered Movement based in Dublin, and like we said there near the end, give Mark a follow over on Instagram. Head over to the show notes page for all the resources and stuff that we talked about in this episode as well. I'm going to link up Mark's website, his YouTube page, and their Instagram page as well. And that will be over at docfitnessonline/episode 30. And the next time you'll hear from me will probably be a Q&A style episode in the coming weeks, depending on when you're listening to this episode. I'm actually off on my honeymoon next week, which is the start of June 2019. And you probably won't see an episode until the end of June or the start of July. And if you have any questions in the meantime, if there's anything you'd love to see covered in the podcast, either drop me a message on Instagram. I'm regularly asking for questions over there for this podcast anyway, or else pop us over an email, and we'll chat to you soon. Bye bye.